Ganong kadaming papeles ang kanilang dinadala araw-araw sa korte. At ilang tao ang kanilang pinaupo sa witness stand? 95. Mr. Bautista, you should know that. Did the Marcoses present a single document? No. Did they present a single witness? No. In fact, the defense of President Marcos and Mrs. Marcos used your own documents. Yung documents na pinresent nila, ginamit. Bakit? To prove that there was not a single one of them that could show that there was money taken from the Filipino people. You should know that, Mr. Bautista. So stop saying that the Marcoses were stealing the money of the Filipino people to buy those buildings in New York. Nalitis na yan ng husto sa araw-araw. I was there. I read those documents. I listened to those witnesses. I wrote about it. And I can talk about it as factually and as truthfully as I am sitting here. Itong si Andres Bautista na idudugso niya kaagad sa frivolity ni Mrs. Marcos, grabe talaga. Hindi lang sa nakakahiya sa kanya, sapagkat may isip naman siya. At pangalawa, sa haba ng panahon ngayon, nag-PCGG pa naman siya, meaning he was in that first executive order of Mrs. Aquino na nagsabi nga na lahat ng mga ari-arian ng mga Marcoses ay nakaw. And that's exactly how he was trying to sound. As a matter of fact, kasi nasa tail end na nga siya na itong PCGG. And again, I have to repeat this. The Presidential Commission on Good Government, which was created by the Executive Order of Mrs. Aquino, one of the first, Executive Order number 1, number 2, number 12, number 12A. Memoryado ko ng lahat na yan. In other words, marami nang dumaan dyan. Ang unang-unang naging chairman dyan ay si Jovito Salonga. You will remember he also became a senator eventually. That was Jovito Salonga. So, siya rin ang, sabi nga, nag-sequester, siya ang kumuha ng lahat-lahat na kanilang pinagsususpetsahan ng mga ari-arian ng mga Marcoses. Because that executive order already declared the Marcoses as thieves. Nagnakaw sa taong bayan. And so that's exactly what Andres Bautista was talking about. Sabi niya, tinan mo, ang yaman-yaman nga nila, kaya nakabili sila ng 4 na building sa New York. And then, he implied, not just implied, but categorically said na nakaw nga sa taong bayan yung pera na binili. My goodness. You know, the trial of New York was a trial of the century, they say, and the whole world was watching that. Why? Because, can you imagine, a former head of state, Ferdinand Edralin Marcos, he was accused in a New York courthouse violating an American law because may 4 na building siyang binili doon, and the accusation is yung kanyang gobyerno is a racketeering, influence, and corrupt organization. Because that's the law na supposedly violate niya. RICO, R-I-C-O, that's the RICO case. Racketeering, influence, and corrupt organization law.
A vindication for her, and the way Mr. Spence defended the administration of President Marcos, a vindication for him also.
So tandaan ninyo, kung matatandaan ninyo yung mga unang pangkwento ko as we started this Rita Gadis Hour, the first case filed actually against the Marcoses under this RICO law was in Los Angeles, sa LA, doon sa court ni Mariana Feltzer. Siya yung district court doon. At ang PCGG ay nagbigay ng mga dokumento sa Justice Department ng Amerika sapagkat hindi naman pwede na ang mga abogado o ang government of Philippines magpa-file ng case in a foreign court. Mali yun. That is not allowed because under international law, your justice system should be the first act of your sovereignty. So, kinailangan na ang file ng case nila dito sa Pilipinas. Pero ayaw nilang pabilikin si President Marcos because they were filing a criminal case. Can you imagine? Pag nanakaw sa taong bayan, that's theft or graft and corruption, however else you would call it. Under our law, that is a criminal offense. So, Marcos should have been tried here in the Philippines. Pero ayaw nila. Because also under our law, the person that's accused must be able to be appearing in court every day that the trial is ongoing. That is a requirement. Kailangan Yan ang karapatan niya na kung sino man nag-a-accuse sa kanya, haharapin niya. Pero ayaw nila. Unang-una, takot sila. Takot sila kay President Marcos kasi magaling na abogado. Pangalawa, natatakot sila na baka yung mga followers ni President Marcos ay talagang andun sila sa courthouse. Alam nila yan. Thirdly, gusto nila na ang Amerika mismo, kasi alam nila ang Amerika is the mightiest sword of justice, yun ang maglilitis. Kaya ang Amerika man naghanap sila ng kanilang batas na pwedeng ipatong kay President Marcos. So they found the RICO case and that was filed in Los Angeles. Of course, all the documents came from the PCGG and the other documents that they were able to source from America, from the banks, from the Swiss, whatever it is. Basta lahat ng dokumento na meron sila. But, isa lang ang witness na pinresent nila doon. Yung mga dokumentong na dinala nila doon, hindi nila ginamit doon sa LA. Ang kanilang ginamit ay mga dyaryo. Philippine Inquirer, lahat yung mga dyaryo na yan, kung saan nakalagay sa mga headlines, Marcos is a thief, Marcos stole so much, Marcos did this, Marcos did that. And they presented one witness, a certain Fernando. Nakalimutan ko yung first name niya eh. Nabit-bit niya yung mga dyaryo na yan para ipakita sa court na si Marcos magnanakaw. Yon. So that was the first case that they filed against Marcos. Si Andres Bautista, he should know this kasi PCGG yan eh. And the first chairman of the PCGG signed some kind of a memorandum of understanding with the Assistant Attorney General of America, of the Justice Department. Ang pangalan niya, Victoria Tensing. Hanapin niyo yung mga pangalan na sinasabi ko. Just to be able to make sure that what I am saying is actually factual. Victoria Tensing and this Jovito Solonga signed a memorandum of understanding that they can exchange documents back and forth, Philippines and America, for the case against Marcos. So yon. Andres Bautista should know this kasi PCGG chairman ni Solonga, tapos itong si Bautista naging chairman din ng... So you should know the history. So what happened in that case? They lost the case in the court of Mariana Feltzer. They lost it. In other words, it was dismissed. Kasi wala nang ebidensya eh. Mga dyaryo ang kanilang pinalabas doon. So nag-appeal. Sabi ko nga, nung nawala yung kaso na yan, nung na-dismiss, nag-intercede si Michael Armacos. Sino ba yung Michael Armacos na yan? He was a former ambassador here in the Philippines. At galit na galit yan kay Mrs. Marcos. Ikikwento ko na rin, sapagkat lumabas na rin to sa dyaryo sa Amerika, I might as well tell that story kung bakit si Michael Armacos may personal na galit kay Mrs. Marcos. Well, Michael Armacos used to play tennis when he was ambassador here. And he was playing tennis with a beauty queen. Okay? And there was, it was an open secret, mayroong chismis na may labi-labi yan dun sa former beauty queen. As a matter of fact, a title holder yan. Miss Universe or something. Anyway, so ganun, meron siyang extramarital affair. Lumabas yan sa dyaryo sa Amerika, hindi ko to iniimbento. Lumabas yan, hahanapin ko yung dyaryo, babasahin ko sa inyo. At ang nagkaroon ng isang parang state dinner sa Malacanang. So lahat ng mga diplomatic corps imbitado. Michael Armacos is invited. Yung isang katenis, itong beauty queen na ito, yun ang tawag nito, deputy ni Mrs. Marcos sa Metro Manila Administration. Yung deputy niya si Ismael Matay. May his soul rest in peace. But he was also part of the tennis team na kalaro niya si Michael Armacos at saka itong beauty queen na ito. So ang ginawa ni Matay, I don't know why he did this, pero sinama niya yung beauty queen na yon dun sa dinner. Okay? Ngayon, dun sa presidential table, sa pag-upo, syempre andun si Ambassador Armacos, Mrs. Armacos. Nakita ni Mrs. Armacos yung beauty queen. Kasi nakakadinig na siya ng chismis eh, na merong affair yung kanyang asawa. Nakita niya. Tumayo siya at bigla siyang tumayo at umalis. So nagulat yung ambassador. Tumayo siya. Yung pala kasi nakita yung si beauty queen. Si Mrs. Marcos nagtaka, walang kamalay-malay si Mrs. Marcos noon. Eh syempre she's the hostess in that dinner, so she stood up sinundan nila si Mrs. Armacos sa patakbo na, palabas na ng pababa na ng hagdanan. At pababa na rin yung ambassador, yung asawa niya. Parang pinipigilan siya. At si Mrs. Marcos din, nagulat. Sabi niya, what is this? What is happening? Ganun. Hinarap siya ni Armacos. Anong sinabi ni Armacos sa kanya? You will remember this night because you'll pay for this. Yon ang simula. Akala ni Ambassador Armacos, sinadya ni Mrs. Marcos. Yun ang galit niya. Yan, binibigyan ko yung storya niya sa background. Hindi ito chismis. Nalabas ito sa dyaryo. Sinulat ito. Yung incident na yan at kinwento nga na ganun nga ang nangyari. Kaya may galit yan si Armacos. Nung siya ay natapos na yung kanyang tour of duty dito sa Pilipinas, pagbalik niya sa Amerika, naging Assistant Secretary of State na siya for Asian Pacific Affairs. Eto na. Yan ang nangyari. Kaya panahon na ni Cory, nakaisip na siyang gumanti. Kaya nung natalo yung kanilang kaso sa regional, hindi regional, sa lower court, regional trial court dito sa Pilipinas yan. Sa lower court dito kay Mariana Feltzer, yung judge, natalo sila doon. Binasa ko sa inyo ito several times. Nag-intercede si Michael Armacos. Kasi pala, yung deal pala ng Amerika, ng bureaucracy ng Washington, this is not American policy. This is the bureaucracy of Washington and this is under George Shultz, yung sa State Department. Ang deal pala nila ay yung protection ng bases. Kaya yun ang kanilang hinahabol kay Mrs. Aquino kasi you must remember, prior to Mrs. Aquino filing her certificate of candidacy, meron siyang grupo na tinatawag na conveners group. And they signed a document. And in that document, doon nakalista kung ano ang gagawin when Mrs. Aquino assumes power. So talagang naniniguro na sila na lahat sila ay susundin kung ano yung pinagkasunduan. Yung conveners group na yan. Meron din akong kopya niyan. Pinirmahan nilang lahat. At isa sa mga nakasulat doon, tatanggalin ang American bases. Kasi andun na nga sila sa Longga, lahat yung mga yan, mga ultranationalist nga, etc. Meron doon nakasulat. One of the numbers there na nakasulat doon na pinirmahan ni Mrs. Aquino at lahat ng kasama niya, sila Ong Pin, lahat ng yan sa conveners group ay tatanggalin ang mga bases. Siyempre, alam ng Amerika yan. Kaya nililigawan nila si Mrs. Aquino na wag niyang tuparin, wag niyang ipatupad kung ano yung pinirmahan niya kasi yun nga ang kanilang deal. So yung deal doon, sige, ikukulong namin si Marcos at si Imelda, basta yung bases wag mo tatanggalin. Yun ang kanilang exchange deal. Okay? So ang nangyari dyan, natalo yung kaso ng RICO case sa LA, nag-appeal. Bakit? Kasi nag-intercede yung former Ambassador Michael Armacos. At yan si Armacos may galit kasi personal ang kanyang galit kay Mrs. Marcos. So they went on appeal. They appealed in the 9th Circuit Court of LA. Court of Appeals na yan. Dininig yung kaso na yon. Babasahin ko sa inyo yung mga portions ng desisyon ng Court of Appeals. Natalo na naman ang Justice Department ng Amerika dyan sa RICO case na yan sa LA at natalo rin ang PCGG kasi sila ang nagbigay na baka dokumento na hindi pala mga dokumento, I'm sorry, yung mga dyaryo. Okay. So ito yung sinabi ng court. On October 3rd, 1986, biruin nyo, within the year, February pa lang naupo si Mrs. Aquino, nauna na yung executive order na yan. Excuse me, March, April, May, in October, ito yung nakalagay sa kanilang decision. On October 3rd, 1986, the Philippine government argued and submitted its appeal in case number 86-6091 and 86-6093, DC number CV-86-3859-MRP. Yan, si Mariana Feltzer yan. The United States Court of Appeals for the 9th Circuit with Circuit Judges Nelson Hall and Kozinski rendered their decision. Tandaan niyo yung mga pangalan kasi record dito talaga sa LA. The following points in digest forms are the findings of the court. Ito, number 1, quotation marks itong binabasa ko. The Filipino revolutionary government of Madam Corazon Aquino provides no direct evidence to support its litany of offenses alleged to have been committed by Mr. Marcos. The only knowledge of these facts comes from countless newspaper and first-hand hearsay accounts relating to them. The Aquino government claims that practically everything that the Marcoses must own have been stolen and therefore belongs to the Philippines. It alleges through a sworn statement of its representative, ito pala yung first name, Fernando. So it alleges through its sworn statement of its representative, Rafael Fernando, that there were bribes, kickbacks, interest in business ventures, and other things of value in exchange for the grant of government favors, contracts, licenses, franchises, loans, and at the same time, expropriating outright private property for the benefit of persons beholden to or fronting for Mr. Marcos, and the said expropriation being in times affected by violence or the threat of violence or incarceration and the direct raiding of the public treasury. Yan ang sinampa ng government ni Mrs. Aquino. The court, in answering this claim, issued a ruling that Mr. Fernando provides no direct evidence to support this litany of offenses, and his only knowledge of these facts comes from countless newspaper and first-hand hearsay accounts relating to them, relating to the newspapers. The court, citing the case of Hatch versus Baez, ito yung decision sa Amerika, 7 HUN 600, ruled that in fact that the defendant has ceased to be president does not destroy his immunity that springs from the capacity in which the acts were done or protects the individual who did them because they emanated from a foreign and friendly government. Paragraph 29. That's the last paragraph. The court concluded that the heart of the case was the assertion of the plaintiff Aquino government and the district court's assumption that all of the Marcos assets must have been stolen. It concluded that the claim and the cause of action of the Aquino government is dismissed under the Act of State and Political Question doctrines, and under either of these doctrines, the plaintiff Aquino government's claim collapses, and with it, its probability of success on the merits. Yan. Kinote nila dito yung case of Underhill versus Hernandez, 168 US 250, 252, 1987 case under the Act of State Doctrine. Yan. So makikita ninyo, yan ang decision. Sinabi nga dito, in order to resolve these various claims against Marcos, the court will have to adjudicate whether Marcos' actions as president were lawful under Philippine law. Yun. Kaya kailangan, ang sinabi nga, dito sa Pilipinas kailangan litisin. Tutuloy ko itong sinabi dito. The court also, this is also part of the decision. The court also rejected the claim of the Aquino government that the Act of State doctrine has no force and effect because it is the Philippines itself that is asking the court to look into the actions of its former ruler. The court stated, ito yung sinabi ng court, we cannot shut our eyes to the political realities that give rise to this litigation, nor to the potential effects on his conduct and resolution. Mr. Marcos and Mrs. Aquino represent only two of the competing political factions engaged in a struggle for control of the Philippines. While the struggle seems to be resolving itself in favor of Mrs. Aquino, this may be the end of this is not maybe the end of the matter. Only 4 years ago, the tables were turned with Mr. Marcos in power and Mrs. Aquino and her husband in exile here in the United States. While we are in no position to judge these things, we cannot rule out the possibility that the pendulum will swing again or that some third force will prevail. Ayan. So, nakikita ninyo, yun ang decision ng Court of Appeals ng LA. Mr. Bautista, yung kaso na yan, PCGG, ikaw, naging chairman ka ng PCGG. When you assume your office, you have to understand the history also of that office. And you should have read this case. That's one. Second, this case was also filed. RICO case was also filed in New York. Ito, kailangan alam mo rin. Kasi sinabi mo sa interview, tingnan ninyo, ang perang ninakaw sa bayan ni ng mga Marcos nakabili ng mga 4 na real estate dito sa New York. Para kang hindi abogado. At hindi mo tiningnan kung ano yung kaso na yan. 3 months and a half yung trial na yan. Araw-araw. 350,000 documents. Galing din sa PCGG, galing din sa inyong opisina. Galing sa mga bangko. Galing sa mga nakuha ng Amerika, sa mga Marcoses nung sila dumating sa Honolulu. Galing sa mga iba't ibang dokumentong nakuha nila sa Malacanang pag-alis ng mga Marcoses. Kayo rin yan. Yan, si Joker Arroyo at yung PCGG, kayong may hawak niyan. Kayo, opisina mo, Mr. Bautista, at ikaw na upo dyan as chairman. All of these documents presented there in the trial in New York. You had 95 witnesses also that were there. Bakit sila sa Longga hindi naging witness? Ewan ko lang. Bakit ikaw? Hindi ka rin humarap doon. Kasi kayo ang nakaupo sa opisina na yan. Why not point your finger and accuse Mrs. Marcos of having stolen the money of the Filipino people if you're so sure of it? If you have 350,000 documents, sabi ko nga pagpapasok ng prosecutor sa loob ng courtroom, hindi nga briefcase ang dala eh. Ang dala niya grocery cart. Yung ginagamit ninyo pag nagsha-shopping kayo, pag namimili kayo ng grocery, malaki. Ganong kadaming papeles ang kanilang dinadala araw-araw sa korte. At ilang tao ang kanilang pinaupo sa witness stand? 95. Mr. Bautista, you should know that. Did the Marcoses present a single document? No. Did they present a single witness? No. In fact, the defense of President Marcos and Mrs. Marcos used your own documents. Yung documents na pinresent nila, ginamit. Bakit? To prove that there was not a single one of them that could show that there was money taken from the Filipino people. You should know that, Mr. Bautista. So stop saying that the Marcoses were stealing the money of the Filipino people to buy those buildings in New York. Nalitis na yan ng husto sa araw-araw. I was there. I read those documents. I listened to those witnesses. I wrote about it. And I can talk about it as factually and as truthfully as I am sitting here. Why am I answering this? Because you are there seated with this lady who made this documentary against Mrs. Marcos, the kingmaker, na sinasabi nga na ayan, wag na silang babalik sa Malacanang sapagkat kinuha nila lahat ng pera ng taong bayan. My goodness! You have no right, Mr. Bautista, to even say it. Precisely because you sat in that office. Tapos sa COMELEC, anong ginawa mo? Nagkaroon ng maraming investigasyon tungkol sa ginamit na Smartmatic. Saka na natin pag-uusapan yung COMELEC na pag-upo mo. Pero ito kasi yung interview sa'yo, hindi naman tungkol sa COMELEC. Yung interview sa'yo, tungkol nga sa sinasabi mong nakaw na yaman ng mga Marcoses. And then, ito talaga, I'm sorry kung nag-iinit ang ulo ko dito because this is really the face of a liar and the face of a hypocrite. Really, if I have to say it. Because, nagkaroon ng isang salo-salo or gathering. I don't know even if it is a party or whatever, but he was invited. May kaibigan si Mrs. Marcos na kaibigan itong si Andres Bautista. Kasama siya sa inimbita doon sa condominium ni Mrs. Marcos, dyan sa Pacific Plaza. Okay. At andun siya. Nakisalo-salo siya, kumain siya, nakipag-usap kay Mrs. Marcos at lahat. Pagkatapos nakita niya, doon sa likod ng isang sofa sa sala ni Mrs. Marcos, meron 2 painting. Actually, maraming paintings hindi na lang niya siguro na-identify yung iba pa. Meron isang Picasso at saka meron isang painting doon. Si Mrs. Marcos pa nga nagsabi sa kanya, oh, this is by this painter. And yes, that is a Picasso. It's an original. So, ang ginawa ni itong si Andres Bautista, pa-picture-picture kunyari, doon sa sa harapan ng mga painting na yon, kunyari pa posing-posing. May intention siya na kukunin yung mga paintings na yun. Kasi sabi nga niya, sinabi rin niya sa interview, because they're subject of the litigation. Mr. Bautista, you should read Executive Orders 1, 2, 12, and 12A. Because your office, the PCGG, has only up to a certain period to have the authority to sequester and to file cases. May deadline kayo, yung opisina mo. It doesn't mean to say na forever pwede niyong litisin ang mga marcoses. May deadline by your own law. And yet, you claim that the reason why you were interested in those paintings because they're subject of litigation. Anong litigation ang pinag-uusapan mo? That was when? 2-3 years ago? Tapos na. Expired na yung authority ninyo. As a matter of fact, even before the PCGG was transferred to the Department of Justice, during the time of Mrs. Arroyo even, wala na kayong karapatan na maghabol pa. You mean to tell me na pagbibili ng laruan, halimbawa, itong mga anak ni Mrs. Marcos, bibili sila ng laruan para sa kanilang mga anak, pati yun, lilitisin ninyo kasi Marcos ang bumibili nun. There is a deadline to this, even, common sense. Not even legally, but common sense. May katapusan yan. At nakalagay din sa inyong batas mismo kung hanggang kailan lang kayo pwede mag-sequester at kung hanggang kailan lang kayo pwede mag-file ng kaso. Hindi ibig sabihin na pag meron kayong madiskubre, halimbawa sa rural bank ng Tayabas o rural bank ng Gihinatilan, meron kayo nakitang deposito doon mga Marcos, kukunin pa ninyo sa panahon na ngayon? 35 years after 1986, 50 years after the Marcoses were in power. Ano ba yan? You must excuse me for sounding like this, but I expected more. And then, dinugsong niya ang nangyari. Parang sinabi niya na kaya siya umalis ng Pilipinas kasi hinaharas daw siya. Without saying kung sino naghaharas sa kanya. Anong sabi niya? Lumipad siya ng Amerika for a while kasi pinanood daw niya yung presidential election sa Amerika. Pagbalik daw niya, parang dinugsong niya dun sa paglilitis niya kay Mrs. Marcos. Pagbalik daw niya, ay hinaharas na siya. Pagpasok daw niya sa apartment niya, nakahalungkat yung kanyang, nakabukas yung kanyang vault, bukas yung kanyang mga aparador, yung mga dokumento niya nakakalat, may mga gwardya, at yung kanyang computer na hack, binuksan at kung anong pinagagagawa. Parang pinalalabas niya ng mga tao ng mga Marcoses ang gumawa nito. Mr. Bautista, kaya ka umalis sapagkat ang asawa mo mismo ang nagsalita. She went public. And this was on air, this was on print, and this was on television, on radio. She was interviewed and a lot of people were reading this, watching her saying that you, Mr. Bautista, got money and kept it, were paid during your stint in the COMELEC or paid somewhere, and that you have a lot of money and that you're not supporting your wife. Ang kaso na yan, yung asawa mo ang mismong nag-file ng kaso laban sa'yo. That was why your computer was open, your cabinet, lahat. Kasi kinwento ng asawa mo, pinakita niya This was shown on television. We all watched this and we were surprised because we were thought you were happily married and you look like a good couple. Yung pala, meron kang tinatago. And you had a deposit somewhere in a rural bank in some remote town. Ilang milyon-milyon. And this came out because your wife said so. And she made testament, she had documents and she had affidavits regarding this. I don't know what happened to that case. Baka binigay mo na yung parte niya kasi sabi nga nung asawa niya, half of that should go to me rightfully or something to that effect. Baka nabayaran mo na rin, kaya natigil na yan. But that is why you're in America. That is why, sabi mo nga, kaya ako umalis. Kasi hinaharas ako. My goodness, Mr. Andres Bautista, how could you lie straight in front of the television in that manner? The Filipino people were witness to all of this. We saw it. We saw what happened to your apartment. We saw your wife talking. Of course, you were denying all of that, etc. But Mrs. Marcos and the Marcoses had absolutely nothing to do with that. You were not being harassed because there were Picasso paintings that you wanted to get from the apartment of Mrs. Marcos. Ay nako, Mr. Bautista, ang lungkot talaga, di ba? Nung nagkakaganyan ang mundo. but there is nothing like the truth, really. And I keep on repeating this. I think it was President Marcos who mentioned this to me. The truth is like a diamond. The more you chisel it, the brighter it shines. And here I am repeating myself every time you have the Rita Gadi Hour, because I've talked about this already before, but this is a new episode, because you have the chairman of the PCGG himself, former chairman, talking like this, a lawyer and supposed to be a brilliant man, connecting what has happened to his life as being harassed to Mrs. Marcos, because he saw a Picasso painting in her apartment and in her condominium, and he wanted to continue the litigation against her. Ay, naku po. My goodness. Anyway. So I wrote here many things also, because then perhaps this would clarify a lot of things. But then, as I've said, I can only speak because I have the documents. I can talk about it because I've read all of this. I can talk about the people who talked about this because I listened to them, and this is not just hearsay. I recorded it as they were talking there on trial as witnesses, and even the court records would bear me out just exactly as I've read even the court records from LA, which was in 1987, 86 and 87. So here we have this lady who made this documentary, as she would call it, or this film about Imelda Marcos. And she did not go through the documents that Mrs. Marcos was showing her. It was one whole bodega. Miss Greenfield, ang ganda pa naman ang pangalan mo. Miss Greenfield, you went, I saw the video. I saw a video clip of you going over, looking at those documents, and Imelda was showing you. Those are the 350,000 documents, Madam, or Miss Greenfield, that she was able to get back from the court. In fact, she paid for them. She had to pay the District Court of New York, the court of John F. Keenan, to be able to get those documents back. Lahat ng ginamit laban sa kanya, binili niya from the court. Para yan ang nakalagay dyan sa kanyang bodega. It's not really a bodega, it's actually one whole room, one whole building, or it's not even a building, basta isang malaking bodega. Very neatly arranged, as a matter of fact. And if you, Miss Greenfield, looked over them carefully, then you would see that these were the documents, all 350,000 of them, that were used against Imelda Marcos. And then, not one. You should have asked her, is there one document here, one page, show me, Mrs. Marcos, that would be able to show that you stole money from the Filipino people, or your president stole, or your husband, Ferdinand Marcos, stole the money of the Filipino people. Kasi lahat yan documented. And it was accepted as evidences in the court in America. Andun yun. So, Miss Greenfield, why did you not ask Mrs. Marcos if there was one document there? And you keep on claiming that she has all this money, that she can buy anything she wants, etc. That's exactly the defense Jerry Spence said. It is not a crime to be rich. It is not a crime to buy those 4 buildings in New York. It is a crime that she loved President Marcos to his death, and that is what I am defending. Yun ang sinabi nga ni Jerry Spence in court, in open court, before the jury. So, Miss Greenfield, you went over those documents, or at least you leafed through them. You were walking through them. You should have asked. Instead of you now in that interview saying that, Mrs. Marcos had this extravagant lifestyle, etc., and all of that. Anyway, so it is very clear. I'm quoting what they said, what you and Bautista said. It is very clear that a lot of money, was taken out of the treasury. Mr. Bautista, you're saying this? Remember, when Mrs. Aquino took over, the Marcoses had no access to the budget that was still there. The documents were there. They had no access to all the documents that were there in the Philippine government. You had access to this. So, you would say that a lot of money was taken from the treasury. What is the treasury? You had the documents of the treasury. Mr. Bautista, you're saying it was taken out of the treasury. Did you check in the treasury if there was one document at all? Or anybody working in the treasury? You could testify. You could have taken any person there to have testified in New York to say, I actually saw President Marcos steal money from the treasury. verbally and you know. And then what else was said there? Yun ang sabi nga ni Bautista, that the shoes were just a distraction daw. Kasi ang pera, ang dami-dami. Mas maraming ninakaw. Kaya yung shoes, ano lang daw yun. Anyway, can you imagine? $10 billion daw ang ninakaw sa taong bayan. Where is the proof? Where is the evidence, Mr. Bautista? And then he's mentioning, kasi ang sweldo daw nila Marcos at nila Imelda, ganun lang, kapirangot. They had a salary which was very little compared to the billions and billions in those accounts, etc., and all of those banks. But of course, but do we know where that money came from? That's exactly what the judge in New York said. You bring this celebrated case into my courtroom and then you tell me, gee, we can't find the documents. The exact words. Memoryado ko. Because for me, that was the clincher. John F. Keenan, District Judge of the trial of Imelda in New York, the RICO case. That's exactly what he told Charles Labella, the prosecutor. He took over Giuliani, remember? Giuliani never prosecuted Mrs. Marcos. He just made an announcement that he would jail Mrs. Marcos. Pero nag-resign na siya to run as mayor of New York City. Natalo siya when he ran for New York City. Anyway, yun ang sinabi ng judge. You bring this celebrated case into my courtroom, and when you receive the fancy ornaments from the tree, you come to my court and say, gee, we can't find the documents. Ano ibig sabihin nun? Hindi makahanap ng dokumento na nagsasabi nagnakaw sa taong bayan. Well, Miss Greenfield and Mr. Bautista, I've just answered you. I don't know how far this Rita Gadi hour would go, but wherever it is and whatever it will reach people, I am reciting exactly court documents and the facts of the case, and I lay my case before you. It is not for any judgment. It's simply to say that, well, I've always repeated this, the truth is very easy to tell. It is only evil that complicates.